And Griffin, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having us, man. This is awesome.
That's good to see you, John.
Absolutely. Well, the you guys have written a book together, and it caught my attention for one enormous reason. That is, it combines leadership and football, the two things that maybe I love as much, if not more than anything, outside of faith and my family, of course.
Of
But
course, of
those two
course.
things blend exceptionally well. And where I want to start is maybe not where you're expecting. Many people in 2026 don't even know who Bill Walsh is, and it's almost sad because he had such a storied history in bringing both leadership and transforming the sport into football. And I don't know why this comes to me, but I'm watching the football games this weekend, the conference championship game or the divisional round, and the Rams versus the Bears. The Rams go right down on their first possession and score. And I look at my 13-year-old. I was like, "Do you know why that was so easy?" He goes, "I have no idea." I was like, "Well, their plays were scripted." And I was
Yep,
like,
yep.
"The coaches, 15 plays, they practice all week, it's scripted." And come to find out, Bill Walsh really revolutionized that idea of scripting your 15 plays and being prepared going in. That's my Bill Walsh story. What's your Bill Walsh story that you want to start with?
No, I mean it's a great story. He really was like the originator of so many of the things that we take for granted in football now. The preparation, the way we practice, the way a game is called. I mean, wearing headsets on the sideline. He was kind of like on the front lines of all of it, right? And so I'm going to tell a little bit of a side story, I guess, about Bill Walsh that'll kind of introduce you, I guess, a little bit to the project that me and Griff decided to work on. The book is titled Bring Your Own Pencil. And everybody asks us, like, what does that mean? And the reason we chose that as the title was because it is one of my favorite Bill Walsh stories. And ironically, Bill's actually a pretty minor character in the story. But what happened was Bill had this long journey to become a head coach in the NFL. He didn't get to be a head coach until he was 47. Now you hear guys 30 years old, we're going to hire a coach to be, our next head coach. It's happening sooner and sooner, but he had to earn it. He had to take the long road there. So finally, 47 years old, takes over the San Francisco 49ers in 1979. They're terrible, like the worst team in professional football, which is kind of hard for us to believe now with some of the success they've had recently and obviously through the 80s, early 90s. So he was taking over a team that was just awful, and he wanted to bring in a bunch of talented young players, but he also wanted them to know what hard work looked like. So it was kind of this balancing act of how do you bring in some veterans that can mentor some of these young guys. And so he signed a guy named Jack Hacksaw Reynolds in 1980, I think, believe 1980, 1981. And here's how he earned that nickname Hacksaw. So he was a linebacker at the University of Tennessee, and he was so upset after they lost a game that knocked them out of the SEC championship game. Then he ended up going to Kmart, buying a 20 pack of hacksaw blades, and sawing his car in half. That was how he released some of his frustration. So he was kind of a psychopath, and we termed it the right kind of crazy because he was so passionate about the game. He loved it, and Bill wanted to bring people in that were just as detail oriented as he was in the preparation. And Hacksaw was famous for bringing his own projector to training camp to watch film. He was famous for bringing a giant stack of pencils and notebooks, and he took notes on everything. He was just ferocious about his preparation. And there's a great story. Again, another name that maybe isn't familiar enough. Ronnie Lott, Hall of Fame player, one of the greatest safeties of all time. He was a rookie. He walks into that first meeting. Bill Walsh is at the front of the room, says, "All right, everybody get out your notebooks and grab a pencil. I want you to take notes on everything." Ronnie Lott's a rookie. He says, leans over. He's sitting next to Hacksaw Reynolds, who's got this stack of 25, 30 pencils. And he's like, "Hey, can I borrow a pencil?" And this dude, Hacksaw Reynolds, turns to him and almost like snarls at him and says, "Bring your own pencil." And that's the title of the book. And really, Ronnie Lott, as he reflects back on that story, says that was such an important moment in my career because it was a veteran leader telling me you're not going to be a success in this league until you start to take accountability for your preparation. And he said, I never forgot a pencil ever again. And he would always take copious notes of everything Bill Walsh said and George Seifert and other coaches. And turned into a Hall of Fame player. The 49ers turned into a dynasty. And we just think that story sums up so much of who Bill Walsh was. It was he had a standard of performance that he tried to hold everyone to and a standard of preparation, but then he also brought in the right kind of people to reinforce that standard. And more is caught than taught. I know that's, kind of a cliche that we talk about in leadership a lot, that people are observing how you prepare, and a lot of times that's going to impact them. And so that's one of my personal favorite Bill Walsh stories. It ended up being the title for the book, and it resonated so much with me and Griff that we decided we are going to write a whole book.
It's a great story. It's actually a phenomenal story. And Griffin, when you think about you're a former military guy, you think about this idea of a pencil versus a pen. And so much in things in the military I feel like they're written in pen. You just have to do it this way. But there's also an added bonus to this title, which is there's something powerful about a pencil and being able to erase it and change it. How do you think about that in terms of either leadership, your example in the military? How do you think about a pencil versus a pen?
What's funny is the stereotypical military leader is that who writes in pen, who gives an order, expects everyone to follow it without any questions asked. And my experience was actually the opposite of that. The best leaders that I worked with function like pencils. They gave, they made decisive action. They made decisions quickly and decisively, but yet at the same time, they didn't expect a subordinate to just blindly follow it. They expected to enable their people, to let them, give what we call left and right limits and define kind of the boundaries and the expectations, but then let their people execute within those to the best of their ability. And as we all know, you actually achieve much better results that way by letting your people be their best within kind of defined boundaries. So I think, to your point, it's the movies talk about the military leader who's kind of an authoritarian, but it's
Right.
actually the ones who have enough humility and wherewithal to let their people be their best and perform in high pressure situations.
It makes me think of when Bill Walsh was with Cincinnati, I believe. I could get the story
Yep.
slightly wrong, but I think he was with Cincinnati and he implemented the West Coast offense for the first time in Cincinnati because his quarterback didn't have a big arm. Like, so he kind of created a system or adapted a system to fit his player versus being like, this is the way we always do it. And if you can't fit in that, you can't play here. And it makes me think of what you were just saying, Griffin, where it's like pencil. Hey, we have a system that we believe in, and we're going to try to adapt it to the people that we have, the situations that we're in. How big is adaptability when you study Bill Walsh or the military, either one of you, to the success of any leader or team?
And I think it's critical. One of the lines we have in the book is the best people don't fit into a system, they define it. And so Bill Walsh built the West Coast offense out of a constraint, like you mentioned, a quarterback that didn't have a big stereotypical arm. And we talk about that in the book. One of our chapters is about the power of constraints, how we tell a couple stories in there, but one of them is the story of Dr. Seuss writing Green Eggs and Ham. He wrote it with fewer than 50 unique words. And it sold over 200 million copies worldwide. It's one of the most beloved children's books of all time. Yet it came out of essentially a challenge or a bet from his publisher that you can't write a book with fewer than 50 unique words. I'm going to put you in a box and see what you can create from that. And one of the great ironies again is that working within a box ironically unleashes the greatest creativity and some oftentimes the greatest work. It's almost cliche to say think outside the box, but ironically sometimes thinking within the box and working within it is actually better. And I love, and maybe I'll pass it over to Dan, but I love how when Bill Walsh built the West Coast offense and when he built the 49ers as a dynasty, he was really building his life's work. There's a number of great lines where it talks about him kind of compiling knowledge throughout his life, taking a bit from this coach, taking a bit from this experience, taking a bit from this place, combining those into his life's work to build the 49ers into something amazing. And so it's those little building blocks over time as you stack them, as you learn from everything along the way, and as you're being adaptable and soaking it all in, that you build something phenomenal. And that's exactly what Walsh put together.
Mm.
You're right on, Griff. And I think, there is no Joe Montana without Virgil Carter. And Virgil Carter is a name that not many football people are familiar with, but he was a lightly recruited guy out of high school, ended up at BYU. They ran the single wing. He wasn't highly thought of, was not an excellent passer, gets to the NFL, makes a roster. Their number one draft pick gets hurt, and all of a sudden he steps in, and Bill has to totally reinvent the offense because he can't do what the other guy could do. And so that is the power of constraints. Sometimes one of Bill's famous sayings was, "While you wait to get what you want, make sure you use what you've got." And it's just this idea of like, don't tell me what somebody can't do. Tell me what they can do. And it's this really empowering mindset of we're going to get the most out of everything we've got every season. And I think Bill is a perfect example of that. And Joe Montana, he was a third round draft pick. He's a Hall of Famer, and a certain generation would consider him the greatest quarterback of all time. And he wasn't thought of very highly in a lot of NFL circles. He didn't have a strong enough arm, didn't have a big enough build. He was perfect for Bill. And so I think that's one of those things where it was such a great leadership lesson for us of not going with the crowd and trusting else's evaluation, but instead looking at somebody and saying, what can they do for us, and how can we unleash their potential within the structure of what we're trying to do?
I don't know why the visual comes in my mind, but you think of his Joe Montana's most famous play is off script,
Yep.
and to win a Super Bowl and rolling right and the catch, I think is what they called it back in the day.
Yep.
You think of a lot of quarterbacks today that like to play off script or move around, but it doesn't work unless you play in the confines of on time and on system more often than not. And I think that's what's kind of unique about this of what Walsh created, adapted to his players, and he continued to adapt it based on the talent that he had at that time. And I think there's real brilliance in that, because so many teams want a system. They desire structure. And then at the same time, they also want the freedom to flex a little bit when it's required or when it's needed. And I think that probably is something that any leader or coach has to learn, of how to put it in the structure of a system and then let my team also be players and perform like they did. The one thing that jumped out at me that I wanted to ask you guys about is Bill Walsh was famous for his standards of performance. I mean, there's stories about him, scripting what his secretary said when she picked up the phone, like that level of detail. When you think about standards of performance, you think about coaches in football or work. The standard is the standard. A standard by definition is what good looks like. We think good leaders define what good looks like. Great leaders define what great looks like. How does a leader like Bill Walsh, that you studied, create this standard of performance that permeates excellence without being a micromanager?
That's such a good question, because there is this tension, this push and pull between having great detail in everything you do and stifling everyone else's ability to make decisions or perform. We call it the bottleneck, where, when you have a leader who's super talented, sometimes they become the bottleneck of the organization because they're the final say in everything. And when they have to be the final say, it really strips people of a lot of their agency. And so there's a risk factor in that. And so I think what people sometimes get wrong about that initial Bill Walsh story of, like you said, this is how we answer the phones with the San Francisco 49ers. He wasn't focused on that in year 5 the way he was focused on that in year 1. Year 1, it was about, we are going to be excellent in everything we do. And he was going to demonstrate what excellent looked like. And once people had a grasp, he really let them go do their thing and become, the masters of their own craft, whether it was a personnel person in the front office, a secretary, an equipment staffer. He expected you to be excellent in everything that you did. And so he modeled that to start. But then, as there's so many stories that we got from people that worked for Bill that said, once he hired you, he really trusted you to do the work. And he would check in periodically to make sure that you were maintaining that high standard. But he really wasn't looking over your shoulder constantly. And so I think there is this push and pull, and it's more of maybe more of an art than a science of first modeling a high standard for yourself. And I think that's what Bill did more than anything, is model the standard, and then ultimately getting other people to rise to the level of your expectations, and then giving them the freedom to go make it happen on their own. And ultimately let them go. I mean, the Bill Walsh coaching tree, and Griff can talk about this as well. Like, the Bill Walsh coaching tree is, the whole NFL is littered with people that worked for Bill or were mentored by him because he empowered you to the point that you could go lead your own organization, and he celebrated people leaving. And there's a lot of leaders that don't celebrate that and don't promote people. And so there's a lot of great lessons to learn from Bill.
Good stuff.
Netflix uses the phrase loosely coupled but tightly aligned. And I think that's exactly what Bill embodied is he made sure everyone was aligned towards the same standards, towards the same outcome, same goals, but yet in the execution of it, they were loosely coupled. He let them go do it to the best of their ability, the way that they would do it. And maybe it didn't look like the way he would have done it himself or the way that he would have instructed them to do it. But at the end of the day, it probably resulted in better results because he brought the right people into the organization. You have to have the right people that are, again, aligned to achieve the great results. And one thing that we talk about as well is the concept of being the expert, which we think the kind of at the foundation of that is the ability to go into the micro details to really zoom in on what's happening on the ground level, but also to step back and zoom out to the strategic level and be able to see the full picture. We use the phrase, zoom in to study the brushstrokes, but zoom out to see the full picture or the full painting. And Bill Walsh was able to do that. He, like you mentioned, he wrote a playbook for how the secretaries answered the phone. He was the expert because he took the time to have that attention to detail to really understand and be the best at that, even though it seemed minute practice. And so he could be the expert in that area, but also zoom out and be the expert on strategy for building the offense, building the defense, how he had built the right people into the right spots. And so that ability to zoom in, zoom out, be in the mud while also zooming out to 30,000 feet, we think is the unique ability to really be the expert and drive an organization from a strategic level, but also being intimately involved in what's happening without micromanaging.
Well, it's so difficult for many leaders and organizations today because they're promoted for their current skills and they get in this leadership role and they're not good. They're great in the details. They're great in the work, but now their responsibility is leading other people, and those people aren't as good as them at the details of the work. And I don't know why this visual comes to me, but I saw an interview earlier this year with the Texas head football coach Sarkisian. And he's asked like, oh, so many of these coaches are moving away from calling plays. Do you think it's time for you to do that at Texas? And he goes, I'm the best play caller we've got. Why would I not call the plays? And I thought about that in two different ways. He's right in that. And I would want Sean McVay calling my plays. I would want, some of these great young play callers, Ben Johnson calling the plays. But it also shows you the power of developing people behind you and making sure you can take that full view of the game. It's a pretty unique skill set, I imagine, but what a lot of people struggle with, what can specifically a leader do? We know they're going to be good at the details because that's what they were good at before, but put yourself in the shoes of a frontline manager now leading their first team. How do they zoom out like that, Griffin, when they're really good in the weeds?
I don't think it's a God-given innate ability for anyone. I think you have to develop that. It's a skill, it's a muscle that you develop over time. And particularly, people are most prone to doing what they are best at or what they're most comfortable with. And if they've been in the weeds nonstop, then that's going to be a very natural inclination. But I think, again, it goes back to having the right people that you can trust. If you've built an organization full of people that you can trust to do a great job and you've given them those left and right limits and a overall kind of strategy or North Star to run towards, then that gives you, it's going to take some trust on your part and some maybe taking a risk to take a step back. And frankly, people are going to fail too. You have to be okay with the inevitable outcome that your subordinates will fail at some point, and you need to still own that, but yet allow them to grow through it, I think is the most important part. So I don't know if there's any practical thing in there other than the fact that you have to be okay with taking your hand off the reins at some point because you've got the right people with their hand on the reins.
Yeah, it is a conundrum of sorts. I like the visual that Dan mentioned. It's kind of this push and pull skill that you build over time. It's just the sad part is it can be so debilitating for a team member when you think of all the stories this year of the head coaches that had to take back the play calling. It's like, I know it's their ass on the line. I got it. Like I got it. But imagine being the offensive coordinator in Detroit this year. I mean, he wasn't even calling the plays last year, and now he's calling the plays again. Or in Washington, it happens because the performance isn't where it needs to be, and the leader can't do nothing. But it's probably one of these challenges that leaders always face, which is how much rope do I give and empowerment do I give, and at the same time being really close to the details. And I think Bill Walsh probably did that as good, if not better, than anybody. I'm sure he wasn't. I know he wasn't perfect, but it sounds like he did it in a good way. You think about Bill Walsh's example from football and the systems. If you had to transfer a lesson, a leadership lesson that you learned from Bill Walsh's example in this story to help an organizational leader, someone not in football, what would that lesson be?
Man, there are so many different directions that we could go with this. You know, I think Griff's earlier point about being the expert is really important. I think you want to stay within your circle of competency. I think when people get outside of their circle of competency and start almost like pretending they have expertise in a certain area that they don't, that's where a lot of their respect is lost. And I think the important piece is, you know, this was a temptation for me when I was a young high school coach. I was a head coach. I was 24 years old, and I just wanted to hire people like me, had my energy, had my creativity, and that was the exact wrong thing to do. You actually have to hire people that are almost the opposite of you in some ways. Maybe I needed to hire somebody who was better at the details of practice and helping me with the logistics and the behind the scenes stuff because I wasn't as good at that. And so, you know, I had a mentor early on tell me, lean into what you're good at and make sure you bring your weaknesses up to a level that doesn't sink you, basically. But you don't want to live in the world where you're just compensating for your weaknesses. So I think one of the things that Bill was really good at was staying in his area of expertise, the offensive side of football. He called the plays in San Francisco, and he gave a lot of freedom to his defensive coaches. And there were times where, yes, he was micromanaging, but I think staying in your area of competence is really important for leaders. And you may be in a position where you did such a good job that you got promoted past your level of competency. And I think that happens to a lot of leaders. And then the question then becomes, what are the weaknesses that are most glaring for me, and how can I surround myself with people that really raise the water level? And the rising tide lifts all boats. It's it's the people around you that can support you, and trust. We talk about trust a lot in the book because really almost everything hinges on trust, and trust is dynamic. It's not static, and that's something me and Griffin reference time and again. Trust is something you have to work on. It's something you have to build. And Bill would often talk about the amount of disagreement that would happen inside the building in San Francisco. Always disagreement, but he said, our enemy is outside the gates, not within the gates. So you always had to resolve conflict quickly. He was just dogmatic about resolving conflict. And so I think if you're a leader, it's going to be difficult, and you're going to have challenges along the way, and you're going to be thinking about all these strategic ideas. But I think the most important thing you can build with your team is trust, and resolve conflicts quickly, get back on the same page, get back pulling in the same direction. And I think a lot of things do get solved when you have teams working together. It's when the factions form that everything starts to break down.
I love what you're saying, Dan, with the circle of competency. Relating this back to Sark and deciding to call the plays or continue to call the plays, well after he could have outsourced it to an offensive coordinator. In the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell calls it knowing thyself. And so there is that circle of competency when you know yourself really well and are humble enough to take account of what you are world class at. It does make sense to keep that within your function. If you're a world class play caller, you should be the one calling the plays, and it's okay that you're quote unquote micromanaging that small aspect of the game because that is your circle of competency. That's your 20% that's producing 80% of the results. And so I think that's perfectly fine. Like it goes back to just knowing thyself, knowing what you can do better than anyone else, and being humble enough to know that it's not everything. It's probably one or two things, and keeping that in mind. But the second leadership lesson that I would just add here on top of being the expert is persevering until you make it. We have a section on the journey of Bill Walsh and the journey of several entrepreneurs that are from other industries within the book. But it's easy to overlook the fact that Bill Walsh coached for 25 years. Here again, Dan mentioned he was 47 when he got a head coaching job, and he went through a lot of trials along the way. But people see this overnight success. He became the head coach, had 2 rough years at the beginning, but by year 3 he won a Super Bowl. And like, okay, he created that overnight. But no, I mean, it was far from it. Again, we talk about your life's work. Bill had been building this playbook. He'd been building his competencies, building the people, building everything over the years. And but he didn't quit. There were so many times, so many stories that we could tell about when he was right on the verge of quitting, being a coach entirely. And he didn't. He persevered until he made it. And we've got a lot of other, stories of great entrepreneurs who just went through tremendous trials, but persevered until they made it. And it's oftentimes the point where you're closest to success that everyone else quits. They just don't realize they're right on the edge.
It's hard. I mean, it's easy to look back and be like, "Oh, he did it," because you see what his success is, but you don't think about all the people that quit right when they were on the cusp of doing something great, like you mentioned. There are two other concepts I want to cover before we wrap up. The first one is, I've been thinking a lot about this idea of like the levels that someone can get to. There's only 32 head jobs in the NFL. There's X number of head jobs in college football. You don't in high school football. I mean, there's not a coach in the NFL that is a dummy. I mean, they're good at what they do. They're one of 32, and but there's also levels within that. You take a quarterback, even the quarterback, the top 32. There's levels within the levels. When you think of Bill Walsh and his journey of leadership, his journey of building a culture, a team, or any of the other leaders that you studied in the book, what do you think is their secret to getting to the next level, not getting complacent once they kind of hit their peak?
I mean, you mentioned the word complacency. It's something that Kurt Signetti talks about, rooting out complacency. Bill Walsh was the same way. It's even after they won a Super Bowl, he would find ways to challenge his team and find ways to essentially, force everyone in the organization to rise to another level when you think there's no other levels to get to. And complacency, I think sometimes people think it's a willpower thing, that you can just grit your teeth and that you can keep pushing through the challenges, through the adversity. But I think it ultimately comes from curiosity and love for the work. I mean, ultimately, I think the people that separate themselves far and away beyond anyone else in their industry are the people that are doing it in their free time. I mean, we reference quote from Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, and he talks about when he's interviewing people for his investment incubator, he's basically asks them what do they do in their free time, and if they have like some hacky project that they're working on in their free time, he's like, that's probably somebody that's going to be really successful. And Bill Walsh, when he was in college, ended up getting a master's degree from San Jose State. He wrote his master's thesis on spread formation football. So he somehow convinced the faculty at San Jose State to let him write this to fulfill, his thesis requirement. And he got a terrible grade because everybody's like, "What are you doing here?" There was no references because there was nothing to reference. And so it was like the obsession was born not out of, some OCD. I mean, maybe there was some OCD, but the obsession was born from like a real love for the craft. And I think that's what a lot of people miss. I had several people reach out to me when we wrote this book and said, I actually think fear of failure is a greater driver than love of the work. And I was like, you know what? Fear of failure is a great short-term fuel. It burns hot, it burns fast, and it can get you moving. But ultimately, the sustained success over long periods of time comes from curiosity and love for the work. And I think when I pull back the curtain on Bill Walsh, like those two themes keep coming up time and again. He says that the best leaders are always learning, and the truly great ones start young and learn until their last day. And I think he's such a great exemplar of always learning and that growth mindset.
Fantastic. Griffin.
Yeah, well, Bill, just like John Wooden, we talk about John Wooden in the book as well, but both of them very distinctly consider themselves teachers first, coaches second. I mean, that's why Bill Walsh didn't even go by coach or Coach Walsh. He went by Bill because he considered himself for one, on the same level as his people, but two, he was a teacher. He wasn't some elevated on a pedestal coach. He thought he was on the same level of his people. And so I think that concept of being a lifelong learner, like Dan mentioned, endless curiosity, and the best teachers are the ones that are always learning themselves, of course, so they can impart that additional knowledge to their students. And that was Bill Walsh to a T. And then the other thing is, we've talked about it several times already, but the way things have always been done is the most dangerous phrase that any organization or team could ever mention. And Bill Walsh was a phenomenal example of going completely against the trends, the way that things had always been done, having grueling practices that are testing the courage of your team and testing them physically and really wearing them out. I mean, he focused on rest and recovery in a way that no one else did at the time. And that's why he was able to have such success, but also he was learning himself. I mean, he grew up in the environment where everybody did that sort of practice, but yet he was learning and open and adaptable to seeing this new way of doing it, which obviously was, as we know now, a much better way of approaching it. So, you know, doing things the way they've never been done is the way we phrase it in the book. But also just being that teacher first, coach second, so that you yourself are continually, ingesting more knowledge to help your people and be a better leader, teammate, coach, whatever it might be.
I feel like I need Bill Walsh. Like, I wish he was like my dad or something. I mean, like this guy just sounds, I mean, I know he's not perfect, but it sounds fantastic. And it's a good model to, I'm really glad that you brought this story forward at this time. It sounds like it's incredibly powerful and needed for leader, whether you like football or not. This stuff is gold. And no matter where you're leading or how you want to lead, these are great lessons to impart. The book is called Bring Your Own Pencil. One of my superpowers, I think, is encouraging other people and inspiring them by breathing life into them. I want to make sure I give you the space to do that today. You get to inspire or breathe life into our audience today. What would you say to them? We'll maybe start with Griff.
Yeah, well, first of all, John, thank you for having us on here. Thank you for what you do and what you put out into the world. Very clear that it does inspire other people and bring out their best selves, which is such a tremendous gift that you give. I would say what we talk about a lot is just don't quit. I mean, the founder of Nike, Phil Knight, he went, if you've read the book Shoe Dog, I mean, it's a tremendous read, but we talk about his story in our book as well. But he went through trials you can't even imagine. I mean, reading that book gives you anxiety yourself just because of all that he went through. And so, but his lesson is just don't quit. Whatever you do, you can pivot, you can make changes, you can be adaptable, but don't quit. Just keep on pushing. And it sounds cliche. I mean, it's the Nike phrase, just do it. But at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. It's so many people come and they're right on the precipice of success. They're right there. They can probably almost see it, but they quit just right as they're on the verge of it. And so if I would give any sort of advice or encouragement to people listening to this, is just you're probably a lot closer to where you want to go than you think you are. And also knowing that it's important to look back at all the progress you've made. So many people are keeping their eye solely focused on that North Star that they forget to look back at how far they've come. Sometimes you got to pause on your journey up the mountain and turn around and just enjoy the view for a little bit and realize, look how far down the ground level is. Look how far I've climbed already, and soak that in and appreciate the fact that you've made tremendous progress. You're a better person. You're probably a different person, and you're making other people better as well through the growth that you've had. And it's good to just take a step back, turn around, look at the view for a little bit, but always keep pushing forward.
God, I'm ready to go climb a mountain, Griff. I mean, let's go get after it. All right, Dan.
Oh man, I so much of what Griff said resonates. Obviously, we just wrote a book together, so we're kind of on the same wavelength right now. But I would say similar to that, one of the best antidotes to anxiety is action. Being an action-oriented person, and deciding what you want and taking practical steps to get there. It's not easy. One of my favorite proverbs is the best time to plant a tree was 50 years ago, and the second best time is now. And so, you may not be where you want to be now, but there are steps that you can take to get there. and you just gotta get started, and you got to keep going. And ultimately, I used to fear so much what other people thought about me and my journey. And anytime I did anything, I was like, what is so and so going to think? What? And the reality is, no one's thinking about you. Everyone is so consumed with their own story that they may think about you for 30 seconds in a day. And if you're going to let that stop you from doing the thing you actually want to do, it's a shame. And it was a hard lesson for me to learn. It took me years to get over that anxiety of what other people might think. But ultimately, pushing past that and choosing to work on the projects that I was most passionate about and to live the life that I wanted. It took courage at the start, and once you get rolling, you can't stop. It's so much fun, and so obviously you've taken those leaps, and you're working on the life that you wanted, and you want, and that's inspiring in its own right. And I would just say for anyone listening, get started today, and nobody's thinking about you. Just do what you want to do.
All right, have a bias for action. I like it.
Always, always.
I think it's such a powerful way to go through life is have a bias for action, have the courage to being scared and deciding to do it anyways. I really appreciate the work that you both put into this book. It comes through both your passion for the topic and your desire to help people improve from a coaching or a leadership perspective. So the book is called Bring Your Own Pencil. We'll make sure to link to it in all the right show notes. Any other place we should send people, Dan?
If you are a football nerd, I run I guess, a Twitter account, Instagram account, Coach Dan Casey. It's very nerdy football stuff, so not expecting you to be in on it unless you're kind of in that sphere. But yeah, check out Coach Dan Casey on your socials, and if you have questions about transitioning out of the military, investing, entrepreneurship, Griffin Brand is the man on all of it. He has been such an inspiration to me. And it's been cool to see our paths overlap. I'm in a completely different industry. I'm doing X's and O's all day long. And to be able to pull my head up and think about the big picture is really a gift. And Griff has allowed me to do that through his experiences and his expertise. So, yeah, that's my pitch for him. I know he's pretty humble.
Well, thank you, Dan. I think a lot of business leaders could learn a lot from the hook and ladder. So
No
There
doubt.
you go.
anyone could benefit from Dan's stuff. That's without a doubt.
Well, thanks for being here, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, John.